Tonight, we begin with a development that Pentagon officials, NATO commanders, and White House advisors had warned about, monitored for weeks, and hoped would never come to this. A coordinated series of actions that unfolded not over weeks or months, but in 72 hours. 72 hours that upended Putin's entire operational timeline. 72 hours that exposed critical vulnerabilities in Russia's Western Front. 72 hours that forced the Kremlin into a reactive posture it has not faced since this war began. What Russia did this week crossed a line that Washington had hoped would hold. And when that line broke, Ukraine did not hesitate. They responded with precision, speed, and overwhelming force. For several weeks now, there had been signals, not official Pentagon briefings, not formal intelligence reports, just signals that Russia was preparing something deeply concerning. Putin has been aggressive, yes, but he has been predictable in his aggression. His moves have followed a certain logic, a rhythm, almost a pattern. But what set off alarm bells in Washington and Brussels this week was that the pattern went silent. Intelligence analysts who monitor Russian military communications know the indicators: the sudden repositioning of mobile missile systems, the encrypted burst transmissions from command centers, the unusual movement of strategic bomber squadrons, the sudden disappearance of key naval assets from satellite coverage. All of that went quiet, and whenever Russia goes quiet, it means something is about to get loud. Early Tuesday morning, U.S. intelligence assets detected what they described as an unprecedented repositioning of Russian strategic forces, including long-range missile platforms that had not been activated in over 18 months. These are the kinds of weapon systems that Russia only deploys when they are signaling something very specific: escalation, intimidation, or imminent offensive action. NATO observers didn't know which category this fell into, or whether it fell into all three at once. But what they did know was that Putin was changing his strategic posture. And when a nuclear-armed adversary shifts posture without explanation, even by a single degree, every intelligence agency in the West pays attention. The warning issued by the White House tonight was not normal. It was not routine. It was not symbolic. It was urgent. Official after National Security Council meeting described Russia's move as provocative, destabilizing, and perhaps most importantly, a direct challenge to the red lines Washington had established privately. But intimidation only works if the target hesitates. Ukraine did not. In fact, their response today was among the most decisive military actions we've seen in this entire conflict. Here's what we know. Within 6 hours of confirmation of Russia's repositioning, Ukraine launched a multi-domain offensive. These weren't the standard drone strikes we've seen before. These were deep penetration operations, advanced systems and tactics that Ukraine only deploys when they are preparing to fundamentally reshape the battlefield. Tonight, Ukrainian military command confirmed that their forces launched precision strikes on at least 14 Russian military targets, including a command and control hub in occupied Crimea that had recently been reinforced with advanced air defense systems for what analysts believe was coordination of the repositioned assets. Ukraine struck before Russia could complete their operational setup. They hit fuel depots supplying forward positions. They hit communication nodes linking Russian units across the southern front. They hit logistics centers that were likely preparing to sustain an extended offensive operation. In other words, Ukraine targeted the nervous system of Russia's planned escalation, the infrastructure that would have made it operational. This is what made Washington's warning so urgent. Russia's repositioning wasn't just symbolic, it was actionable. It represented the kind of move that could fundamentally alter the trajectory of this war if left unchecked. And Ukraine, understanding that fully, responded with force. Not recklessly, not impulsively, but strategically. They didn't attack civilian areas. They didn't strike Russian territory in ways that would trigger Article 5 concerns. They hit military infrastructure. They hit operational capability. And here's where the story becomes even more significant. Western intelligence officials now believe that Russia's latest move was designed to test the cohesion of the Western alliance after months of political division over aid packages. Putin wanted to see whether NATO and its partners would fracture under pressure. But instead, the opposite happened. Ukraine and its allies didn't show cracks. They demonstrated a level of coordination that was so rapid, so comprehensive, that even Moscow noticed. You don't get the Kremlin's attention easily. But today, Kyiv did. Defense analysts speaking with Western media outlets under anonymity described Russia's shift as strategic probing, a way to identify weaknesses before a larger operation. But Ukraine proved today that they remain both capable and unpredictable. Their strikes were not only effective, they were timed so precisely that Russian air defenses had less than 4 minutes of warning. That timing matters because it shows intelligence penetration that Russia clearly did not anticipate. It shows that Ukraine is not merely reacting to Russian moves. They are anticipating them. As reports continued coming in throughout the day, we learned more about the scale of Ukraine's response. Ukrainian Air Force assets carried out over 40 sorties in a 6-hour window, forcing Russian air defenses to deplete critical missile stocks. Special operations units targeted a radar installation that had been upgraded in the last 3 weeks. Naval drones operating in the Black Sea reportedly destroyed or disabled 2 patrol vessels used by Russia to enforce their grain blockade. This wasn't just a counterattack. This wasn't just retaliation. This was strategic degradation. This was systematic disruption. And systematic disruption is the one thing Russia has struggled to maintain since the failed advance on Kyiv in 2022. For every territorial gain they have made, Ukraine has countered with something that undermines their ability to hold or exploit it. Remember, Putin thought NATO would splinter after the first winter of energy pressure. He thought Ukraine would negotiate from weakness by now. He thought Western weapons would stop flowing after domestic political battles. But tonight, the exact opposite is happening. NATO is more unified than at any point since the Cold War. Ukraine is striking deeper and harder than ever before. Western weapons are not only flowing, they're being used with devastating effectiveness. What makes this moment so critical and so dangerous is that Russia's latest move happened at a time when Putin is under unprecedented domestic and international pressure. Military hardliners want total mobilization and nuclear threats. Economic advisors want de-escalation to ease sanctions. Regional governors want resources redirected to internal stability. His own security services want a victory they can actually claim. Putin is balancing these demands while casualties mount and the war drags into its 3rd year. And when leaders in that position make sudden moves, they're not doing it from strength. They're doing it from pressure. They're doing it from vulnerability. Washington's formal statement, now circulating through diplomatic channels worldwide, was designed to signal that the United States is not willing to allow Russian escalation to go unanswered. Senior officials said plainly that Russia's repositioning was inconsistent with any pathway toward de-escalation or negotiation. That is diplomatic language for, we see what you're doing and we're not going to let it work. You don't usually hear that tone from the State Department unless something serious is at stake. Meanwhile, Ukraine's President Zelensky addressed his nation and the world in a defiant, resolute speech tonight. He said, they wanted to test our will. They found it unbroken. He said, every missile they move, we see. Every plan they make, we counter. And he said, Ukraine does not wait for threats to become attacks. We act first. These are not rhetorical flourishes. These are statements from a wartime leader that understands just how high the stakes have become. Here's what makes the situation even more concerning. Russia's latest move wasn't isolated. Along with the strategic repositioning, Belarus also increased military exercises along the northern border. Russian naval forces expanded patrol patterns in the Baltic. Pro-Kremlin hackers increased cyber attacks targeting NATO infrastructure in Eastern Europe. All of this happened within the same 72-hour window. When Russia moves multiple pieces at once, it means something larger is underway. Analysts are now considering several possibilities. One is that Russia is preparing a major winter offensive before the ground freezes. Another is that Russia is attempting to create leverage before any potential peace negotiations. A third possibility, the one worrying officials the most, is that Russia is attempting to fracture Western support by demonstrating that escalation carries no consequences. But today, Ukraine took that card off the table. They didn't wait for permission. They didn't seek approval through lengthy bureaucratic channels. They didn't telegraph their response days in advance. They struck hard, struck fast, and struck where it hurt most. What we're watching now is a test of resolve. Russia wants to see whether the West will blink first. Ukraine wants to show that every escalation will be met with decisive response. Washington wants to prevent this conflict from spiraling beyond control, and Europe wants to prevent becoming the next target of Russian aggression. Tonight, we've heard from intelligence officials who are now analyzing satellite imagery of the strike aftermath. They say at least 9 of the 14 targets show significant damage. They say Russian forces are now repositioning defensively rather than offensively. And they say Russia's decision to move those strategic assets forward is likely part of a broader pattern of intimidation intended to weaken Western resolve before winter. But Ukraine is not backing down. In fact, Ukraine is doubling down. Their response today, rapid, precise, and devastating, sent a message to Moscow that escalation is a two-way street. And it sent a message to Washington and NATO that their investment in Ukrainian defense is paying dividends. As the situation develops, we expect more details to emerge about what exactly Putin hoped to achieve. But what we do know is that Washington's warning was timely. It coordinated Allied response. It gave Ukraine the green light they needed. And it demonstrated that Western intelligence is tracking every Russian move in real time. What happens next will depend on what Russia does in the next 48 to 72 hours. If they back down and reposition defensively, this moment will be remembered as the day Putin's bluff was called. If they escalate further, Ukraine and its allies have already shown they are ready and willing to respond in kind. They have shown they are ready to respond. And tonight, for the first time in months, Russia appears to be recalculating. The Kremlin is quiet, too quiet. And when Moscow is quiet, it means they are reassessing. It means they are choosing their next move carefully. Because tonight, Putin learned something he should have learned long ago. Ukraine will not be intimidated. The West will not be divided. And every escalation will be met with consequences. This story is far from over. But tonight, one thing is clear. The historic blow was delivered. The counterstrike was devastating. And the Kremlin is, for the first time in a very long time, stunned. And we will be here watching every detail as the next chapter unfolds.